I never imagined my own siblings would drug my champagne and shave my head bald the night before my wedding, but I definitely didn't expect them to be the ones begging for mercy by morning. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals come from the people who share your blood, wrapped in laughter and justified as just a harmless prank. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next didn't just save my wedding day, it exposed secrets that would shatter my family's carefully constructed lies forever. Before we dive back in, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we've got more incredible stories coming your way. My name is Cassandra Hayes, and I should have seen it coming. My younger twin siblings, Derek and Lydia, had always treated our family like their personal stage for chaos and cruelty, with me cast as their favorite target since we were children. But even knowing their history of pranks that left scars both visible and invisible, I never thought they'd go this far. Not on the most important day of my life. The warning signs had been there for months, ever since I announced my engagement to Nathan Cross, a kind, successful architect who loved me with a steadiness that felt like coming home after years of storms. My family's reaction had been mixed at best. My mother, Patricia, offered congratulations that felt hollow, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. My father, Gordon, barely looked up from his newspaper when I shared the news at Sunday dinner. But Derek and Lydia's response was the most telling. They exchanged one of their signature twin looks, the kind of silent communication that had always excluded me, and Derek smirked before saying, "Well, isn't that precious? Our big sister finally found someone desperate enough." I had learned to let their comments slide off me like water off glass. 28 years of being the family scapegoat had taught me that reacting only fed their need for attention and gave them the satisfaction they craved. Nathan noticed, of course. He always did. "Your siblings seem..." He paused that evening as we drove home from the dinner, searching for words that wouldn't sound too harsh, challenging. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," I replied, squeezing his hand. "They've always been like this. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be used to being treated that way, Cass," he said gently, and something in his tone made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Love, yes, but also grief for all the years I'd spent convincing myself that my family's treatment was somehow normal or deserved. The wedding planning had been a minefield of passive aggression and deliberate sabotage disguised as helpfulness. Lydia volunteered to be my maid of honor, and I accepted against Nathan's quiet concerns, desperately hoping that maybe this milestone would finally bridge the distance between us. Maybe standing beside me at the altar would make her see me as someone worthy of basic respect. Instead, she used her position to undermine every decision. The flowers I chose were tacky. The venue was trying too hard. My dress, which I'd spent months finding and which made me feel beautiful for the first time in years, was not really flattering for your body type, but I guess it's fine. Derek appointed himself in charge of the bachelor and bachelorette parties, insisting on a joint celebration the night before the wedding at my parents' estate in Willowbrook, the sprawling property where I'd grown up feeling like a perpetual guest in someone else's home. The estate sat on 15 acres of manicured gardens and woodland, far enough from the nearest neighbors that sound carried only to indifferent trees. "It'll be intimate," Derek assured me with that charming smile he could turn on and off like a light switch. "Just close family and a few friends. Nothing crazy, I promise." Nathan wanted to refuse. "Your brother doesn't have the best track record with promises," he pointed out as we discussed it in our apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes for the move to our new home after the honeymoon. We were building a life together, something solid and real, and his protective instincts were on high alert. "I know," I admitted, "but they're my family. If I don't give them this chance, they'll make the wedding unbearable. You know how they can be." What I didn't say, what I could barely admit to myself, was that some small, stubborn part of me still hoped. Hoped that this time would be different. Hoped that my siblings would finally see me as someone deserving of their love instead of their contempt. Hoped that the little girl who used to watch Derek and Lydia play together, never invited to join their twin world, might finally be welcomed into the family circle. Hope, I would learn, can be the cruelest emotion of all. The night before my wedding arrived with perfect June weather, the kind of evening that seemed designed for celebration. I wore a simple white sundress, saving my wedding gown for tomorrow's ceremony at the Riverside Chapel in town. Nathan held my hand as we drove up the familiar tree-lined driveway to my parents' estate, the enormous colonial-style house looming against the darkening sky. "We can still leave if anything feels wrong," he murmured as we parked. "Just say the word." I kissed him softly, grateful for his unwavering support. "It'll be fine. Just a few hours, then we'll go back to the hotel and tomorrow we'll be married. Nothing can ruin that." Famous last words, as they say. The party was already in full swing when we entered through the back terrace. Strings of lights decorated the garden, and a bar had been set up near the pool. I recognized most of the faces, family friends, a few of Nathan's groomsmen, my cousin Jennifer who'd always been kind to me, and of course, my siblings holding court at the center of attention as they always did. "There she is," Lydia called out, rushing over with a champagne flute in each hand. "The bride-to-be. We've been waiting for you." She thrust one of the glasses into my hand, her smile bright and seemingly genuine. Derek appeared at her side, raising his own glass. "To Cassandra and Nathan," he announced loudly. "May their marriage be everything they deserve." The emphasis on that last word should have warned me, but I was too focused on the unexpected warmth of the moment, too desperate to believe that maybe, finally, things were changing. I raised my glass along with everyone else and drank deeply, the champagne crisp and cold against my tongue. I didn't notice the bitter aftertaste until it was far too late. What I also didn't know, as I laughed and mingled and tried to enjoy what should have been a beautiful celebration, was that my phone was recording everything from my purse, accidentally activated when Lydia had bumped into me. And I certainly didn't know that Nathan's best friend, Lucas, a criminal defense attorney with instincts honed by years of spotting danger, was watching my siblings with growing suspicion. By the time the world started to blur at the edges and my legs began to feel like water, the trap was already closing around me. But it was also closing around Derek and Lydia, though they wouldn't realize it until morning when they discovered that their cruelest prank had finally, catastrophically, backfired. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The champagne hit my system faster than it should have. Within 20 minutes, the garden lights seemed to blur and multiply, each bulb sprouting halos that danced at the edges of my vision. I blinked hard, trying to clear my head, attributing the sensation to nerves and the single glass I'd consumed too quickly on an empty stomach. "You okay?" Nathan's voice came from somewhere beside me, concerned and slightly muffled, as though he were speaking through cotton. "Fine," I managed, forcing a smile. "Just a little dizzy. Maybe I should sit down." He guided me to one of the wrought iron chairs near the pool, his hand steady on my elbow. Lucas, Nathan's best friend and the best man, appeared with a glass of water. I noticed him watching Derek and Lydia across the garden, his expression unreadable but tense. "Drink this," Lucas said, pressing the glass into my hand. "All of it." Something in his tone cut through the fog in my brain. Lucas was a criminal defense attorney, someone who'd spent 15 years reading people, spotting lies, sensing danger. His instincts had kept countless clients out of prison and had, on more than one occasion, identified threats before they materialized. "What's wrong?" I asked, but my tongue felt thick, the words coming out slurred. Nathan's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Lucas thinks something isn't right." Across the garden, Derek and Lydia stood with a small group of their friends, people I'd never particularly liked. There was Amber Chen, Lydia's college roommate who'd once, accidentally, spilled red wine on my graduation dress. Troy Bartlett, Derek's fraternity brother who thought cruelty was a personality trait. And Jasmine Wu, who seemed to exist solely to amplify whatever malicious energy the twins generated. They were laughing, that particular quality of laughter that comes at someone's expense rather than from genuine joy. And they kept glancing in my direction, their eyes bright with anticipation. "I saw Lydia put something in your champagne," Lucas said quietly, crouching beside my chair so others wouldn't overhear. "Right before she brought it to you." I wasn't certain at first, but the way you're reacting, and the way they keep watching you." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The world tilted sideways. Not just from whatever drug was coursing through my system, but from the confirmation of what some part of me had always known: my siblings weren't capable of change. They would never see me as worthy of their love or even basic human decency. "We need to leave," Nathan said, already helping me to my feet. "Now." But standing proved more difficult than anticipated. My legs buckled, and only Nathan's quick reflexes kept me from hitting the ground. The movement drew attention, exactly what my siblings had been waiting for. "Oh no." Lydia's voice carried across the garden, dripping with false concern. "Is Cassie okay?" "She looks a little unsteady." They approached in a pack: Derek, Lydia, Amber, Troy, and Jasmine, circling us like predators who'd finally cornered their prey. Up close, I could see the barely contained glee in my sister's eyes, the smirk playing at the corners of Derek's mouth. "Maybe she's just overwhelmed," Derek suggested, his tone mockingly sympathetic. "Big day tomorrow and all. Remember how stressed she used to get before exams? Always falling apart under pressure." "I'm fine," I tried to say, but the words came out garbled, my coordination failing. The drug, whatever it was working faster now, pulling me down into a fog I couldn't fight. Nathan's voice turned sharp. "What did you give her?" "Give her?" Lydia's eyes widened with theatrical innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe our sister just can't handle her alcohol. Wouldn't be the first time she's embarrassed herself at a family event." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I wondered if anyone else would believe it. But Lucas stepped forward, his attorney's demeanor cold and authoritative. "I saw you," he said directly to Lydia. "I watched you drop something into her glass before you gave it to her. And I'm prepared to testify to that fact if necessary." The mood shifted instantly. Derek's easy smile faltered. Lydia's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "That's a serious accusation," Derek said carefully, but I could hear the calculation in his voice, the scrambling to adjust his plan. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not," Lucas replied flatly. "The question is whether you want to explain to the police what you gave her, or whether you prefer to help us get her somewhere safe and hope this doesn't turn into a criminal matter." My mother chose that moment to emerge from the house, drawn by the commotion. Patricia Hayes had perfected the art of selective blindness over the years, seeing only what fit the narrative she preferred. She took one look at me, swaying and incoherent in Nathan's arms, and her expression hardened. "Cassandra, really," she said with disappointment so familiar it barely registered anymore. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that, well, perhaps you should go lie down until you've pulled yourself together." "Mrs. Hayes," Nathan's voice was tight with controlled fury, "your daughter has been drugged." Lucas witnessed Lydia putting something in her champagne. My mother's eyes flickered to Lydia, who immediately burst into tears, a talent she'd honed since childhood. "Mom, I don't know what they're talking about." Lydia sobbed. "I would never. Cassie's my sister. I've been trying so hard to make tonight special for her, and now they're accusing me of this horrible thing." The performance was flawless. I'd seen variations of it hundreds of times. The tears, the trembling voice, the wounded innocence. And I watched my mother soften, exactly as Lydia knew she would. "There must be some misunderstanding," Patricia said firmly. "Lydia has been nothing but supportive throughout this wedding planning. Perhaps in the excitement, something was misinterpreted." "I know what I saw," Lucas insisted, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. He was facing the immovable force of a mother who'd spent decades protecting her favored children at any cost. My father appeared then, Gordon Hayes in his typical uniform of expensive casual wear and an expression of vague irritation at having his evening disturbed. He assessed the scene quickly, his gaze landing on me with the familiar disappointment I'd learned to expect. "What's all this about?" he demanded. Derek stepped forward, assuming his role as the reasonable son. "Dad, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Cassie had some champagne, she's feeling overwhelmed about tomorrow, and now Nathan's friend is making wild accusations about Lydia. It's getting out of hand. Gordon nodded slowly, accepting this version immediately. Well, that settles it then. Cassandra, you should go rest. We'll all laugh about this in the morning when you're thinking clearly. The casual dismissal, the automatic belief in Derek and Lydia's innocence, the unwillingness to even consider that his golden twins might be capable of such cruelty, it was so painfully familiar that even through the drug-induced haze, I felt the old wound open fresh and bleeding. We're leaving, Nathan announced, his arm tight around my waist, supporting my weight as my legs threatened to give out entirely. Don't be ridiculous, Patricia said sharply. Where would you go? The hotel is 45 minutes away, and Cassandra is in no condition to travel. She needs to sleep this off here. Sleep this off, Lucas repeated incredulously. She's been drugged, Mrs. Hayes. She needs medical attention. You keep saying that, Derek interjected, his voice taking on an edge, but you have no proof. What you saw was my sister handing Cassie a drink at a party. That's all. Everything else is your interpretation based on, what? The fact that the bride is nervous before her wedding? The gaslighting was masterful. I could see doubt creeping into even Nathan's expression, not about what had happened, but about whether we could prove it, whether fighting this battle tonight was worth the energy when I so clearly needed help. Listen, Lydia said, her tears miraculously dried, replaced by a tone of sweet reasonableness. Why don't we all take a breath? Cassie can rest in her old room upstairs. We'll stay nearby in case she needs anything. In the morning, when everyone's calmer, we can sort this out. But let's not ruin the wedding eve with accusations and drama. The suggestion seemed so rational, so mature, that I saw my mother nodding approvingly. Even my father looked relieved at the prospect of conflict avoidance. But I could barely stand. The room was spinning, and dark spots danced at the edges of my vision. Whatever they'd given me was pulling me down into unconsciousness, and some primal part of my brain was screaming danger, warning that falling asleep here, surrounded by people who'd already proven they meant me harm, was a catastrophically bad idea. No, I managed to force out, the single syllable requiring enormous effort. Leave. Need to leave. Nathan heard me. More importantly, he listened. We're going to the hospital, he announced, already guiding me toward the garden exit. If you try to stop us, Lucas will call the police. Your choice. For a moment, I thought it might actually work. We were moving toward the gate, Lucas flanking us protectively, creating a barrier between us and my family. But then Lydia's voice cut through the night, sharp and angry, the mask finally slipping. You're really going to do this? She demanded. Make a scene, involve the police, potentially ruin the wedding? Over nothing? God, Cassie, you're so desperate for attention that you'd sabotage your own wedding day just to make us look bad. The accusation was so absurd, so perfectly inverted from reality, that I would have laughed if I'd had the coordination. But the words worked their magic on my parents, reinforcing the narrative they'd always preferred, the difficult older daughter causing problems, the innocent twins trying their best to cope with her drama. Perhaps Cassandra does need some space, Gordon said slowly. But involving the authorities over a family misunderstanding seems excessive. Nathan, surely you can see that. I watched Nathan's jaw clench, saw the war playing out behind his eyes. He wanted to protect me, wanted to get me somewhere safe, but he was also facing down my entire family, questioning his own judgment against their unified front of denial and manipulation. It was Lucas who made the decision. I'm calling 911, he said, pulling out his phone. You can explain to the paramedics why you think a woman who can barely stand and is clearly under the influence of something shouldn't receive medical attention. The threat of official involvement, of outsiders witnessing this family dysfunction, finally shifted the dynamic. My mother's face went white. My father's expression darkened with fury, but also fear. Fine, Derek said quickly, too quickly. Take her to the hospital if you're that concerned. We were just trying to keep things low-key for her sake, but if you want to make it a federal case, go ahead. The sudden capitulation should have been a relief, but something in Derek's tone set off alarm bells even through my drugged stupor. He sounded almost pleased. As though we were playing directly into his hands. Nathan didn't seem to notice, too focused on getting me to the car. Lucas kept his phone visible, making it clear he was prepared to follow through on his threat if anyone tried to stop us. We made it to the driveway, to Nathan's car, and I was vaguely aware of being settled into the passenger seat, of the safety belt being fastened across my chest. The last thing I saw before my eyes closed involuntarily was Lydia's face in the rearview mirror, illuminated by the garden lights. She was smiling. Not the fake, performative smile she used for others, but a genuine expression of satisfaction. They'd wanted us to leave. The hospital threat hadn't scared them, it had given them exactly what they'd been working toward all along. As consciousness slipped away and Nathan's voice faded to a distant murmur, my last coherent thought was a question I couldn't voice. What were they planning to do once I was gone? I wouldn't know the answer until morning. But by then, the damage would be done, captured in photographs and video that my siblings had believed would humiliate me beyond recovery. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have anticipated, was that their cruelty would be their undoing, and that sometimes the evidence of your own malice is the rope that hangs you. The hospital's fluorescent lights were too bright, stabbing through my eyelids even when I kept them closed. Sounds filtered through gradually, the beep of monitors, hushed voices, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum floors. My mouth tasted like copper and chemicals, and my head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. Cassie? Nathan's voice, rough with exhaustion and worry. Can you hear me? I managed to open my eyes, squinting against the harsh lighting. Nathan sat beside the hospital bed, his face drawn and pale, still wearing the casual button-down shirt from the party. How long had we been here? What? My voice came out as a croak. My throat felt raw, as though I'd been screaming, though I had no memory of it. You're at Riverside General, Nathan explained, reaching for the plastic cup of water on the bedside table. The doctors had to pump your stomach. You've been unconscious for about 4 hours. 4 hours. The wedding was supposed to start at 2 in the afternoon. I tried to do the math through the fog in my brain, but the numbers wouldn't cooperate. What time is it? I asked after taking a small sip of water. Almost 3 in the morning, Lucas answered from the corner of the room, where I hadn't noticed him standing. His suit jacket was draped over a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and he looked like he'd aged 5 years in one night. The doctors confirmed you were drugged. Rohypnol, combined with a sedative. A dangerous combination in those dosages. Rohypnol. The date rape drug. My siblings had given me the date rape drug at my own wedding party. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not just a prank. Not just sibling rivalry taken too far. They had deliberately incapacitated me with a substance used to render victims helpless, unable to resist or remember what happened to them. They're facing criminal charges, Lucas continued, his attorney's voice flat and professional, though I could hear the anger beneath it. I documented everything I witnessed, and the hospital's toxicology report provides clear evidence of drugging. The police were here earlier, but they'll need your statement when you're feeling up to it. I should have felt vindicated. After years of being gaslit and told I was overreacting, here was undeniable proof that my siblings were capable of real harm. But instead, I just felt tired and sad and strangely empty. The wedding, I said suddenly, trying to sit up. What about the wedding? We're supposed to. We're postponing, Nathan said firmly, gently pressing me back against the pillows. Cassie, you were poisoned. The wedding can wait. But all the guests, the venue, the practical concerns tumbled out, even as part of me recognized how absurd they were. My siblings had drugged me, and I was worried about disappointing our wedding guests. Already handled, Lucas assured me. I contacted the venue and your wedding planner around midnight. They're notifying guests that the ceremony is being rescheduled due to a medical emergency. No details, just that postponement is necessary. The relief that washed over me was complicated by a deeper grief. This was supposed to be the happiest time of my life. Instead, I was lying in a hospital bed, my body violated by people who were supposed to love me, facing the reality that my family's dysfunction was far worse than I'd ever admitted to myself. "Your parents called," Nathan said quietly, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. "Multiple times. They want to talk to you." "What did they say?" I asked, though I could already guess. Nathan and Lucas exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. "They're claiming this is all a misunderstanding," Lucas said bluntly. "That Derek and Lydia were just trying to help you relax before the wedding, that we overreacted by bringing you to the hospital, and that the toxicology report must be wrong because their children would never do something so malicious." Of course. The denial was so predictable it would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Even with medical evidence, even with witness testimony, my parents would find a way to reframe reality to protect Derek and Lydia. "They want me to drop the charges," I said. "It wasn't a question." "They want you to not make things worse," Nathan corrected, and I could hear the quote marks in his voice. "Your mother specifically said that pressing charges would destroy the family and that you needed to think about what this would do to Derek and Lydia's futures." "Not my future. Not my health or safety or well-being." Their concern, as always, was for the twins and their precious reputations. A nurse entered to check my vitals, and the conversation paused while she made notes on a tablet and adjusted my foredrip. She offered a sympathetic smile that suggested she'd seen too many cases like mine, victims of people they trusted. After she left, Lucas pulled a chair closer to the bed. "There's something else you need to know," he said carefully. "Your phone, the one in your purse at the party, it was recording." I stared at him, confused. "Recording what?" "I didn't turn on any recording. We think it activated accidentally when Lydia bumped into you," Lucas explained. "But whatever the cause, your phone captured audio from most of the evening. And Cassie, there's evidence on there you need to hear." Nathan's hand tightened around mine. "We listened to some of it while you were unconscious." "I'm sorry, we needed to know what happened after we left." "After you left?" I repeated. "What do you mean? Didn't they just go back to the party?" Lucas pulled out his phone, my phone, I realized, and held it so I could see the screen. "Your siblings and their friends stayed in the garden for another hour. And they talked quite freely, assuming you were gone and no one was listening." He pressed play, and my sister's voice filled the small hospital room, crystal clear and utterly damning. "Can't believe they actually fell for the hospital threat," Lydia was saying, her voice bright with malicious glee. "I thought for sure Lucas would stay and try to play hero." "The best part," Derek's voice responded, "is that by the time Cassie wakes up tomorrow, it'll be too late. The photos will already be everywhere." "Did you get good ones?" That was Amber's voice, slightly slurred with alcohol. "Perfect ones," Lydia confirmed. "Cassie passed out in the car before they got far. We followed them, waited until Nathan went inside the hospital with her, and then I got into their car. She was completely unconscious, didn't even stir when I shaved her head. The room seemed to tilt around me. I raised my hand instinctively to my head, feeling the normal weight and texture of my hair. Confused, I looked at Nathan. "They didn't get the chance," he said quietly. "Lucas suspected they might try something, so he stayed with the car while I went inside with you. When Lydia approached with scissors and a razor, he stopped her. She'd already taken photos of you unconscious in the passenger seat, though. Those are what they were planning to use." Lucas forwarded the recording. More voices, more laughter, more casual cruelty. "Mom and Dad will smooth it over like they always do," Derek was saying. "Cassie might be mad for a while, but what's she going to do? We're family. She'll forgive us eventually. She always does. And if she doesn't," Lydia added cheerfully, "who cares? At least we'll have humiliated her properly." Bald bride photos going viral on her wedding day, that's legendary. The recording continued with more details of their plan. How they'd intended to post the photos to social media with captions about "Bridezilla meltdowns" and "When the stress gets to you." How they'd already created fake accounts to share and amplify the images, ensuring maximum humiliation. How they'd planned to act innocent and concerned when confronted, claiming they'd tried to stop me from hurting myself in my drugged state. It was sociopathic in its calculation. Not a spontaneous prank but a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological destruction, planned and executed with the specific intent to ruin the most important day of my life. Lucas stopped the recording. There's more, almost 45 minutes of them discussing various details. Your parents joined them toward the end, and... He hesitated. You should probably hear their part when you're feeling stronger. Tell me now, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to know. Nathan's expression was anguished, but he nodded at Lucas, who forwarded to another section of the recording. My mother's voice emerged from the phone speaker, tight with controlled irritation. I don't appreciate being pulled away from our guests to deal with this drama. What's so urgent? We need to get our story straight, Derek said. In case Cassie tries to cause problems tomorrow. What story? My father asked, sounding more curious than concerned. About the champagne, Lydia explained. Lucas claims he saw me put something in Cassie's drink, but it's his word against mine. If we all say we saw nothing unusual, that Cassie just got overwhelmed and drank too much, no one can prove otherwise. There was a pause, long enough that I hoped maybe my parents would surprise me, would finally stand up for me and refuse to participate in the cover-up. Then my mother spoke. Well, of course we'll support you. Cassandra has always been prone to dramatics. Everyone knows that. If she's going to make accusations about her own siblings on her wedding day, people will understand that she's simply stressed and not thinking clearly. Exactly, my father agreed. Derek, Lydia, you've done nothing wrong. You've been nothing but supportive throughout this whole wedding process. If Cassandra wants to be ungrateful and create problems, that's her choice, but we won't allow her to damage your reputations with baseless accusations. The casual dismissal, the automatic defense of the twins, the willingness to lie to protect them, it was everything I'd experienced my entire life, captured in stark audio clarity. No more gaslighting about whether I was being too sensitive or misinterpreting their intentions. Here was proof that my parents knew exactly what Derek and Lydia had done and chose to enable it anyway. Lucas turned off the recording. The silence in the hospital room felt heavy and suffocating. I'm sorry, Nathan said softly, and I realized tears were streaming down my face, though I hadn't felt them start. I'm so sorry, Cassie. You deserved so much better than this. The crying continued, deeper now, pulling from somewhere primal and long suppressed. These weren't just tears for tonight's betrayal, but for 30 years of accumulated wounds, for every time I'd been told I was overreacting or too sensitive, for every Christmas and birthday and family gathering where I'd felt like an outsider in my own family. Nathan held me while I sobbed, his arms steady and warm, and Lucas quietly stepped out to give us privacy. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving me feeling hollowed out but strangely clearer, as though crying had washed away some fog I hadn't realized was clouding my vision. What do I do now? I asked, my voice hoarse. You rest, Nathan said firmly. You recover. And then you decide what you want to do about your family. But Cassie, you need to understand something. Lucas has already given this recording to the police. Your siblings are facing serious criminal charges, possibly your parents too, for conspiracy after the fact. This isn't just family drama anymore. It's a legal matter. The implications slowly penetrated my exhausted brain. Criminal charges meant trials, meant publicity, meant our family's dysfunction would be exposed for everyone to see. It meant Derek and Lydia might actually face real consequences for the first time in their lives. It also meant burning bridges that could never be rebuilt, severing family ties permanently, becoming the person who had destroyed the Hayes family unity. But as I lay there in that hospital bed, my body still recovering from being poisoned by my own siblings, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't that desperate little girl anymore, the one who would accept any crumbs of affection, who would forgive any transgression just to belong. Derek had been wrong in his recording. I wouldn't forgive them this time. I couldn't. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because forgiveness without accountability wasn't actually forgiveness. It was just enabling the next violation, the next betrayal, the endless cycle of abuse disguised as family loyalty. They're going to be furious, I said quietly. When they find out about the recording, about the charges. Let them be furious, Nathan replied. You almost died tonight, Cassie. The doctor said that combination of drugs, at those doses, could have caused respiratory failure. They didn't just try to humiliate you. They put your life at risk. The words landed with terrible clarity. My siblings hadn't just planned a cruel prank. They'd created a situation where I could have died, and they'd done it laughing, treating my life as nothing more than a joke for their entertainment. As dawn light began filtering through the hospital window, turning the harsh fluorescent lighting softer and more forgiving, I made a decision. Not in anger or revenge, but from a place of self-preservation and simple human dignity. I want to press charges, I said. All of them. Derek, Lydia, and if the lawyers think there's a case, my parents too for their cover-up attempt. Nathan kissed my forehead gently. I'm proud of you. I'm scared, I admitted. You should be. This is going to be hard. But you're not alone, and you're doing the right thing. The hospital door opened, and Lucas returned with a police detective, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Brennan and pulled up a chair beside my bed. Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice gentle but professional, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. When you're ready, I'd like to take your statement. But there's something you should know first. Your siblings and their friends are currently at the Willowbrook police station. They turned themselves in about an hour ago. I stared at her in disbelief. They turned themselves in? Why would they do that? Detective Brennan's expression was grim. Because someone sent them the audio recording from your phone, along with a message saying it had been forwarded to law enforcement. They're trying to get ahead of it, control the narrative. Their attorney is already claiming this was all a misunderstanding, that they intended no real harm. But the recording proves, I started. The recording proves intent, Detective Brennan confirmed. Which is exactly why they're scrambling. Ms. Hayes, this case is going to be high profile. Your family has significant resources and community standing. They're going to fight this aggressively. I need to know if you're prepared for what that means. I thought about my siblings' faces last night, laughing as they planned my humiliation. I thought about my parents' casual dismissal of my safety in favor of protecting the twins' reputations. I thought about 30 years of being told my pain didn't matter, my feelings weren't valid, my experience of reality was somehow flawed or exaggerated. I'm prepared, I said, and meant it. What I didn't know yet, what none of us could have anticipated, was that by morning, the tables would turn in ways my siblings never imagined possible. Because while they'd been busy planning my humiliation, they'd created a digital trail of their malice that would destroy them. And sometimes justice comes not from revenge, but from allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own cruelty. The morning sun was cruel in its cheerfulness, streaming through the hospital window as though nothing terrible had happened. I was discharged at 8 o'clock with a prescription for anti-nausea medication and instructions to follow up with my primary care physician within the week. The nurse who processed my paperwork kept shooting me sympathetic glances that made me feel exposed, as though the word victim was stamped across my forehead in permanent ink. Nathan had gone home briefly to shower and change, returning with clean clothes for me and a grim expression that suggested he'd already been fielding phone calls. Lucas had left an hour earlier to meet with the district attorney's office, armed with the audio recording and his own witness testimony. Your mother has called 17 times, Nathan said as he helped me into his car, his voice carefully neutral. Your father 12. Derek has tried 6 times, Lydia 9. I haven't answered any of them. Good, I said, though my hands trembled slightly as I fastened the seatbelt. Some part of me, the part that had spent 30 years seeking their approval, wanted desperately to answer those calls, to hear their explanations, to find some way this could all be a misunderstanding after all. But I'd heard the recording. There was no misunderstanding left to hide behind. There's something else, Nathan said as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot. The story broke online about 2 hours ago. Someone leaked it to the press, probably someone from the police station or hospital. It's already going viral. My stomach dropped. What exactly is going viral? He handed me his phone, already open to a local news website. The headline read, "Prominent Willowbrook family faces criminal charges after alleged wedding eve drugging." I scanned the article with growing horror. It was all there: the party at my parents' estate, the drugging, the hospital visit, the arrests. What made it worse was the comments section, already filled with hundreds of responses ranging from supportive to skeptical to outright vicious. "How could she do this to her own family?" one comment read. "Obviously looking for attention and a payday." "The Hayes family are pillars of our community," another insisted. "This girl is clearly unstable and making false accusations." But there were others too. "I went to school with the Hayes twins. They were bullies then and apparently they haven't changed. And, good for her for pressing charges. Family doesn't give you the right to poison someone." "Don't read the comments," Nathan advised, taking back his phone. "Most of those people don't know you or the full story. Their opinions don't matter." But they did matter, in the way that public perception always matters when you're suddenly thrust into unwanted spotlight. My private family dysfunction was now entertainment for strangers, fodder for gossip and judgment and speculation. We drove toward Nathan's apartment, our apartment now, I supposed, since I'd already moved most of my belongings there in preparation for the wedding. The thought of the wedding sent a fresh wave of grief through me. All those plans, all that hope for a beautiful celebration surrounded by loved ones, destroyed by people who were supposed to love me most. "Lucas called while you were getting discharged," Nathan said, breaking into my thoughts. "The DA wants to meet with us this afternoon. Apparently Derek and Lydia's lawyer is already trying to negotiate a plea deal." "A plea deal?" I repeated. "It's been less than 12 hours. Their attorney is Gerald Whitmore. He's expensive and aggressive, and he knows that audio recording is devastating evidence. He's trying to minimize the damage before this goes to trial." Gerald Whitmore. I knew that name. He'd represented several high-profile clients in cases that had dominated local news cycles, and he had a reputation for getting favorable outcomes for guilty clients through a combination of legal maneuvering and media manipulation. "What kind of plea deal?" I asked. "Lucas will have the details, but apparently they're offering to plead guilty to misdemeanor charges in exchange for no jail time, just probation and community service." The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. They'd drugged me with a substance used by rapists, planned to publicly humiliate me at my own wedding, and endangered my life with their reckless dosing. And they might walk away with nothing more than probation? "That's not acceptable," I said, my voice harder than I'd heard it before. "Lucas agrees. He's pushing back hard. But Cassie, you need to understand, even with the recording, trials are unpredictable. They could claim they didn't know the drugs would be dangerous, that it was meant as a harmless prank gone wrong. Their lawyer will paint them as foolish but not malicious, play up their youth and clean records. They're 26, I pointed out. That's not exactly youthful indiscretion territory." "I know. I'm just preparing you for the arguments we're going to face." We reached the apartment, and I felt a strange disconnect walking into the space we'd decorated together, the home we'd been building. Everything looked the same: our books on the shelves, wedding gifts still in boxes waiting to be unpacked, the calendar on the wall with "Wedding Day" written in Nathan's handwriting on what should have been yesterday. I stood in the middle of our living room and felt the full weight of loss settle over me. Not just the wedding, but the family I'd desperately wanted to believe in. The fantasy that somehow, someday, Derek and Lydia would see me as worthy of their love. The hope that my parents might finally choose me over their golden twins. "I need to call them back," I said suddenly. "My parents. I need to hear what they have to say." Nathan's expression was troubled. "Are you sure that's a good idea right now? You just got out of the hospital, you're still recovering." "I need to know," I interrupted. "I need to hear them try to justify this. Because right now, there's still this small part of me that wants to believe they didn't know how bad it was, that they'll apologize and acknowledge what Derek and Lydia did was unforgivable." "Cassie." Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. "You heard the recording. You know they knew." "I know. But I need to hear it directly from them. I need to give them one chance to do the right thing. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. But I'm staying right here with you. And if they say anything that's harmful or manipulative, we're ending the call. I picked up my phone, staring at the 17 missed calls from my mother. My finger hovered over her name, and for a moment I considered backing out, protecting myself from whatever words were about to be spoken. But I'd spent my whole life avoiding confrontation, accepting mistreatment to keep the peace. If I was going to truly break that pattern, I needed to face this directly. I pressed call. My mother answered on the first ring. Cassandra. Finally. Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for hours. No, are you okay? No, we were so worried. Just irritation at my unavailability. I was in the hospital, Mom. Being treated for drug poisoning. You know, because Derek and Lydia drugged me. A sharp intake of breath. That's a very serious accusation to make about your own siblings. The police have informed us that you've pressed charges. How could you do this to your family? The question was so perfectly aligned with my expectations that I almost laughed. Not, how could they do this to you, but, how could you do this to them? Mom, there's audio recording of them admitting what they did. Admitting they planned to shave my head while I was unconscious and post photos online to humiliate me. There's medical evidence proving I was drugged. This isn't an accusation, it's documented fact. People say things when they're upset that they don't mean, my mother replied, her voice taking on that familiar tone of condescending patience. Derek and Lydia have explained everything to their lawyer. It was meant to be a harmless joke, helping you relax before the wedding. They had no idea you'd have such an extreme reaction. A harmless joke, I repeated flatly. Mom, they gave me Rohypnol. Do you understand what that drug is used for? I understand that you're upset and looking for someone to blame for your own inability to handle stress appropriately. But turning on your own family, trying to have your siblings arrested, this is going too far, Cassandra. The gaslighting was so blatant, so perfectly executed, that I felt almost dizzy with it. She was rewriting reality in real time, transforming my siblings from perpetrators into victims of my vindictiveness. I heard the recording of you and Dad, I said, my voice shaking now. The one where you discussed covering for them, where you called me dramatic and agreed to lie about what happened. The police have that recording too, Mom. You and Dad might be charged as accessories. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her, that recording was obtained illegally. Our lawyer says it won't be admissible in court. It wasn't obtained illegally. My own phone recorded it accidentally, and Lucas witnessed the drugging firsthand. You're not going to be able to lie your way out of this. We're not lying, my mother snapped, her composure finally cracking. We're protecting our children from a vindictive attack by someone who's always been jealous of her siblings, who's always caused problems in this family, who apparently can't even get through her own wedding without creating drama. The words should have hurt. A week ago, they would have devastated me, sent me spiraling into self-doubt in desperate attempts to prove I wasn't the problem. But something had fundamentally changed in that hospital room when I'd heard my family's casual dismissal of my pain, their willingness to sacrifice my well-being for their own convenience. You're right about one thing, Mom. I can't get through my wedding, because my siblings poisoned me the night before. But that's the last thing they're ever going to take from me. If you go through with this prosecution, you're out of this family, my mother said, each word precise and cutting. We will not support someone who's trying to destroy her own siblings' lives over a misunderstanding. You'll be making a choice, Cassandra. Them or us. You've already made that choice, I replied. You made it 30 years ago, and you've made it again every single time you chose to believe them over me, to protect them while leaving me to fend for myself. So this isn't me choosing. This is me finally accepting the choice you've always made. You'll regret this, my mother said, her voice shaking with fury now. When you're alone, when Nathan realizes what kind of person he's married to, when you have no family to turn to, you'll regret throwing away everything for your pride. The only thing I regret, I said quietly, is spending so many years believing I was the problem. Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call before she could respond, my hand trembling so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. Nathan was beside me immediately, pulling me into his arms as the tears came again, different from last night's crying. These tears were cleaner somehow, purging rather than drowning. I'm proud of you, Nathan murmured into my hair. That took incredible strength. I just burned every bridge with my family, I said, my voice muffled against his chest. No. They burned those bridges a long time ago. You're just finally accepting it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. And another. I pulled away from Nathan to look at the screen, expecting more abuse from my parents. Instead, I found messages from people I'd barely thought about in years. My high school art teacher saw the news. Always knew your siblings were trouble. You did the right thing. A college roommate, are you okay? Please call if you need anything. Even some distant cousins I hadn't spoken to since childhood, expressing support and sharing their own stories of Derek and Lydia's cruelty over the years. It's not just your immediate family, Cassie, Nathan said, reading over my shoulder. There are people who see you, who believe you, who've been waiting for someone to finally hold Derek and Lydia accountable. The phone rang again. This time it was Lucas. The DA wants to move forward with felony charges, he said without preamble. Administering harmful substances with intent to impair, conspiracy to commit assault, and they're considering adding attempted identity fraud for the fake social media accounts they created to spread the photos. Whitmore's plea deal is off the table. What does that mean for sentencing if they're convicted? I asked. Potentially several years in prison, depending on how the judge sees it. The premeditation, the planning, the complete lack of remorse, it all works against them. Plus, the recording of your parents discussing the cover-up strengthens the case that this was a coordinated family effort. Several years in prison. For Derek and Lydia, who'd never faced real consequences for anything in their lives, who'd been protected and enabled by parents who valued reputation over accountability. There's more, Lucas continued. Whitmore tried to spin this to the media this morning, claiming his clients are victims of a vindictive sister. But someone, and we're not sure who, leaked portions of the audio recording to several news outlets. The one where Derek and Lydia are laughing about their plan. Is that legal? Nathan asked. It's complicated. But the damage is done. Public opinion is shifting rapidly. The Hayes family's reputation is crumbling, and social media is having a field day with it. Several of your parents' country club friends have already released statements distancing themselves from the family. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt strangely numb, as though I were watching this happen to someone else from a great distance. Cassie? Lucas's voice pulled me back. You still there? I'm here. What happens next? We meet with the DA at 3 o'clock to go over your statement and discuss trial strategy. Derek and Lydia's arraignment is tomorrow morning. The judge will set bail, though Whitmore is going to argue for release on their own recognizance given their ties to the community. Will I have to see them? The thought of facing my siblings in a courtroom, of looking into the faces of people who'd tried to destroy me, made my chest tighten with anxiety. Not tomorrow. You're the victim, not required at the arraignment. But eventually, yes. At trial, you'll need to testify. After Lucas hung up, Nathan and I sat together on the couch in silence. Outside, life continued normally. I could hear children playing in the courtyard below, someone's music drifting through an open window, the ordinary sounds of a Saturday afternoon. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. My family was facing criminal charges. My wedding had been postponed indefinitely. My name and story were being discussed by thousands of strangers online. And somewhere across town, Derek and Lydia were probably huddled with their expensive lawyer, still believing they could charm or manipulate or buy their way out of consequences. What they didn't know yet, what the morning would reveal, was that sometimes the evidence is so overwhelming that no amount of money or reputation can overcome it. And sometimes the person you've spent years underestimating is the one who finally brings your carefully constructed world crashing down around you. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from an unknown number. This is Detective Brennan. Just wanted you to know, your siblings posted bail an hour ago. They're out. Thought you should be aware for your safety. Let me know if you need anything. I showed the message to Nathan, whose expression darkened immediately. They're out, I said unnecessarily. Then we're leaving, Nathan decided. Pack a bag. We're staying at a hotel until this is resolved. I'm not taking any chances with your safety. As I moved mechanically through our apartment, gathering clothes and toiletries, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't just the victim anymore, passively accepting whatever my family chose to inflict on me. I was an active participant in my own story, making choices that prioritized my safety and well-being over their comfort. And tomorrow, when Derek and Lydia stood before a judge and faced the beginning of real accountability, they would learn what I'd finally accepted, that family isn't defined by blood, but by how people treat you. And by that measure, they'd stopped being my family a long time ago. The hotel room was generic and impersonal, exactly what we needed. Nathan had chosen a place on the opposite side of town from my parents' estate, a mid-range business hotel where no one would think to look for us. We checked in under his name only, and he'd paid cash despite the desk clerk's obvious confusion at the unusual request. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone as notifications continued to pour in. The story had exploded beyond local news. National outlets were picking it up now, drawn by the salacious details and the dramatic class elements. Wealthy siblings face felony charges in wedding eve drugging, read one headline. Bride's hair-shaving plot exposed through accidental recording, claimed another. Each article included photos, my siblings' professional headshots from their respective LinkedIn profiles, looking polished and successful. My own photo, pulled from social media, showed me at a friend's birthday party 2 years ago, laughing unself-consciously at something off-camera. The contrast was deliberate, them composed and corporate, me casual and unguarded. The media was already constructing a narrative, and I wasn't sure I liked the role they were casting me in. You should eat something, Nathan said, returning from the vending machines with an assortment of snacks. You haven't had anything since the hospital. I accepted a granola bar without enthusiasm, my stomach still unsettled from the previous night's chemical assault. The anti-nausea medication helped, but food still seemed like an abstract concept my body wasn't quite ready to embrace. My phone rang. Lucas. Turn on channel 7, he said without greeting. Now. Nathan grabbed the remote and found the local news channel. A blonde anchor was speaking with practiced concern, developing story of the Hayes family case. We've just received confirmation that the district attorney's office has added Patricia and Gordon Hayes, parents of the accused, to the criminal complaint. They're being charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy after the fact. The screen cut to footage of my parents being escorted into the police station by Detective Brennan. My mother's face was a mask of fury barely contained by her obvious awareness of the cameras. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him, his usual commanding presence diminished by the circumstances. The charges stem from an audio recording in which the elder Hayes couple allegedly discussed fabricating a cover story for their children's actions, the anchor continued. Legal experts say this development significantly strengthens the prosecution's case by establishing a pattern of family complicity. Nathan muted the television. How do you feel? He asked carefully. How did I feel? The question seemed impossible to answer. Relief that my parents were facing consequences for their enabling behavior. Guilt that I'd set these events in motion, despite knowing logically that they'd created this situation themselves. Grief for the family I'd always wished I had but never actually did. And beneath it all, a strange kind of liberation, as though chains I hadn't known I was wearing had suddenly fallen away. I feel like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion, I said finally. And I'm both the victim on the ground and the witness who called for help. That's fair, Nathan said, settling beside me on the bed. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about this. Lucas called back. The DA wants to meet earlier than planned. Can you be at her office in an hour? We arrived at the district attorney's building through a back entrance, avoiding the news crews that had gathered at the front. Detective Brennan met us in the lobby, guiding us through security and up to the third floor where Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh waited in a conference room lined with law books and case files. Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of several of my more demanding professors in college. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for us to sit. "Miss Hayes, thank you for coming. I know this has been an extraordinarily difficult time. I want to start by saying that your willingness to press charges and provide testimony is crucial to this case. Many victims of family violence choose not to pursue justice, which allows perpetrators to continue their patterns of abuse." Family violence, I repeated. The term felt too large, too serious for what had happened, even though I knew objectively that drugging someone absolutely constituted violence. "That's what this is," Walsh confirmed, as though reading my thoughts. "Your siblings didn't just play a prank. They administered dangerous controlled substances without your knowledge or consent, with the explicit intention of rendering you helpless so they could further victimize you. The premeditation and planning make this especially egregious." She opened a folder and spread several documents across the conference table. "I want to walk you through what we have and what we need. First, the physical evidence. Hospital toxicology reports confirming rohypnol and sedatives in your system at dangerous levels. The emergency room physician's notes documenting your condition upon admission. Second, witness testimony. Lucas Brennan's first-hand account of observing your sister administer the drugs. Third, and most damning, the audio recording." Walsh pulled out a transcript, dozens of pages detailing everything that had been captured on my phone. Seeing the words in print made them somehow more real, more undeniable. "Your sibling's attorney is Gerald Whitmore, one of the best defense lawyers in the state," Walsh continued. "He's already filed motions to suppress the audio recording, arguing it was obtained without consent. However, since it was your own phone that did the recording, accidentally or not, and since the conversations took place in a semi-public venue where there was no reasonable expectation of privacy, those motions will almost certainly fail." "What about my parents?" I asked. "Why are they being charged now?" "The recording of them discussing the cover-up establishes criminal conspiracy. They knowingly assisted in concealing a felony and agreed to provide false statements to law enforcement. Under state law, that makes them accessories after the fact. Additionally, we're investigating whether they provided any financial assistance in planning or executing the original crime." Nathan leaned forward. "What kind of sentence are we looking at if they're all convicted?" Walsh's expression was carefully neutral. "For Derek and Lydia, given the severity of the drugging, the premeditation, and the intent to cause further harm, we're seeking significant prison time. 3 to 7 years, possibly more depending on how sentencing guidelines are applied. For your parents, as accessories, likely less, perhaps 2 to 4 years, with the possibility of suspended sentences depending on the judge and their cooperation." The numbers hung in the air like physical weights. My siblings could spend years in prison. My parents, who'd lived their entire lives in positions of privilege and comfort, might actually serve time behind bars. "I need to be clear about what you're facing if this goes to trial," Walsh said, her gaze fixed on me. "Whitmore will try to destroy your credibility. He'll dig into your history, your relationship with your siblings, any past conflicts or incidents. He'll try to paint you as vindictive, jealous, unstable. He'll argue that the drugging was a misguided attempt to help you relax, that your siblings didn't understand the dangers, that this is being blown out of proportion by an attention-seeking bride who wants to punish her family." "But the recording," I started. "The recording is powerful evidence," Walsh interrupted, "but it's not magic. Whitmore will argue context, interpretation, that your siblings were joking or venting frustration rather than describing actual intent. He'll bring in expert witnesses to testify about how trauma and stress can cause people to misremember or exaggerate events. He'll make you relive every difficult moment of your relationship with your family, and he'll do it in front of a jury, the media, and everyone you know." The reality of what I'd set in motion was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about justice. It was about surviving a public dissection of my most painful experiences while lawyers tried to twist them into weapons against me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Because I need you to be prepared. And because I need to know if you're committed to seeing this through, even when it gets ugly. Which it will. I thought about my mother's ultimatum on the phone. About Derek's assumption that I would forgive them because I always had. About 30 years of being told my pain didn't matter, my feelings weren't valid, my reality was somehow suspect. I'm committed, I said. What do I need to do? Walsh spent the next 2 hours walking me through what would happen next. The arraignment tomorrow where bail conditions would be set. The preliminary hearing in 2 weeks where a judge would determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. The discovery process where both sides would exchange evidence and witness lists. And eventually, if no plea deal was reached, a trial that could last weeks and would expose every ugly detail of my family's dysfunction to public scrutiny. There's one more thing, Walsh said as we prepared to leave. Your siblings' bail was set at $50,000 each. They posted it within hours. However, the judge included conditions: no contact with you, no leaving the state, and surrender of their passports. If they violate those conditions, they'll be immediately rearrested. What about my parents? Nathan asked. They're being processed now. Bail will likely be set at a similar amount, with similar conditions. The Hayes family has significant resources, so bail isn't really a deterrent. But the no-contact order is important. If any of them try to reach you, calls, texts, emails, third-party messages, you document it and report it immediately. Bail violations can strengthen our case. As we left the DA's office through the same back entrance we'd used to enter, I felt Detective Brennan's hand on my arm. A word, she asked, and Nathan nodded, stepping away to give us privacy. I've been doing this for 23 years, Brennan said quietly. I've seen a lot of family violence cases. Most victims don't follow through with prosecution. The pressure from family, the guilt, the fear of being ostracized, it breaks people down. They drop charges, recant testimony, accept plea deals that let their abusers walk free. Are you trying to prepare me for that? I asked. I'm trying to tell you that what you're doing takes extraordinary courage. And I want you to know that even if the legal system fails you, which I hope it won't, but it sometimes does, you've already accomplished something important. You've drawn a line. You've said that your safety and well-being matter more than maintaining a facade of family harmony. That matters, regardless of what happens in court. Her words settled something in me that had been loose and anxious since this all began. Because she was right, I had already made the most important choice. Everything else was just follow-through. Back at the hotel, exhaustion hit me like a physical force. I'd been running on adrenaline and fear for nearly 24 hours, and my body was demanding rest it had been denied. Nathan ordered room service while I showered, trying to wash away the hospital smell that seemed to cling to my skin. When I emerged, he'd set up our laptop on the desk, the screen showing a document. What's that? I asked. A list, he said. Of everyone we need to contact about rescheduling the wedding. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist. I thought we could work through it together, maybe set a new date for a few months from now when all this is resolved. I looked at the list, at all the vendors we'd so carefully chosen, the details we'd agonized over. The wedding that should have happened yesterday felt like something from another lifetime, planned by a different version of me who still believed in the possibility of reconciliation with people who'd never wanted it. I don't think I want a big wedding anymore, I said quietly. Not after all this. Nathan's expression was carefully neutral. What do you want? Something small. Just us, maybe Lucas and a few close friends. Something that's about us starting our life together, not about performing happiness for an audience. I think that sounds perfect, Nathan said, and the relief in his voice suggested he'd been hoping I'd say something like that. We spent the evening making calls, explaining to vendors that the wedding was being postponed indefinitely due to unforeseen family circumstances. Most were understanding, a few annoyed about the short notice, none aware that the bride they'd been preparing to serve had spent her wedding eve in the hospital being treated for poisoning. As night fell and the hotel room grew dark except for the glow of our laptop screen, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer, your cousin. I saw the news. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I want you to know that a lot of us in the extended family have been waiting for years for someone to finally stand up to Derek and Lydia. You're not alone in this. We're here if you need us." More messages followed throughout the evening. Distant relatives I barely remembered. Old friends from high school I'd lost touch with. Even a few of my parents' former associates, quietly expressing support and sharing their own stories of witnessing my siblings' cruelty over the years. Each message was like a small light in the darkness, confirmation that my reality hadn't been distorted or exaggerated, that other people had seen what I'd seen and had simply lacked the power or platform to address it. "You're building a different kind of family," Nathan observed, reading over my shoulder. "One based on choice and genuine connection rather than obligation and blood." He was right. The family I'd been born into had failed me in every way that mattered. But I was discovering that family could be something else entirely, people who showed up when it mattered, who believed you without needing proof, who valued your well-being over their own comfort. As I fell asleep that night in the anonymous hotel room, Nathan's arm around me and my phone full of messages from people I'd never expected to hear from, I realized something fundamental. My siblings had thought they were destroying me with their cruelty. Instead, they'd freed me from the prison of seeking approval from people who would never grant it. Tomorrow they would stand before a judge and begin facing consequences for their actions. But the real reckoning had already begun, not in a courtroom, but in the quiet courage of finally choosing myself over the illusion of family unity. And that was something no lawyer or plea deal could ever take away. The morning of the arraignment arrived with oppressive humidity, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier than it should. Nathan and I dressed carefully, professional but not overdressed, wanting to blend into the courthouse rather than stand out. Lucas had warned us that media presence would be significant, and he'd been right. We could see the news vans from 2 blocks away. "We can still use the back entrance," Lucas offered, meeting us at the corner. He'd arranged for courthouse security to escort us through a service door, avoiding the cameras clustered at the main steps. "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'm not hiding. I didn't do anything wrong." Nathan squeezed my hand. "You sure?" I wasn't, actually. The thought of those cameras, those shouted questions, the footage that would be replayed on evening news and dissected on social media, it terrified me. But I was more afraid of living the rest of my life as someone who hid from the truth, who let shame define her when the shame belonged to someone else. "I'm sure." The walk from the car to the courthouse steps felt eternal. Reporters surged forward the moment they recognized us, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in our direction. "Ms. Hayes, how do you feel about your siblings being charged? Do you regret pressing charges against your own family? Is it true you're seeking financial compensation?" Lucas moved ahead of us, his presence creating a small buffer. "My client has no comment at this time. Please respect her privacy during this difficult period." We pushed through the crowd and into the courthouse, where the chaos outside gave way to institutional quiet. Security waved us through metal detectors, and Lucas guided us to a small waiting room on the 3rd floor where ADA Walsh was reviewing documents. "Good, you're here," she said without looking up. "The arraignment is in 20 minutes. This should be straightforward. The judge will read the charges, your siblings will enter their pleas, and bail conditions will be confirmed. You don't need to say anything, just observe." "Will I see them?" I asked. "Yes. They'll be in the courtroom. But remember, they can't approach you or speak to you. The no-contact order is in effect." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected from watching legal dramas on television. The benches were worn wood, the walls institutional beige, everything designed for function rather than drama. But the people filling those benches brought plenty of drama with them, reporters with notebooks, curious onlookers, and scattered throughout the room, members of my extended family I hadn't seen in years. Nathan and I took seats in the 2nd row, Lucas beside us. I scanned the room, looking for my parents, and found them sitting on the opposite side, near the front. My mother's posture was rigid, her face carefully composed. My father stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the whispers and stares directed their way. Then the bailiff called, "All rise," and everyone stood as Judge Raymond Morrison entered. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He settled behind the bench and gestured for everyone to sit. Case number 2024, CR 8847, State v. Derek Jonathan Hayes and Lydia Marie Hayes. A side door opened, and my siblings entered flanked by a bailiff. Derek wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Lydia had chosen a demure dress with a pearl necklace, the picture of innocence. Their lawyer, Gerald Whitmore, stood between them, late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of polished confidence that came from years of winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. This was the first time I'd seen Derek and Lydia since the party, and the sight of them hit harder than I'd anticipated. They looked tired, the polish slightly dimmed, but still fundamentally them. Still the siblings who'd tormented me for 30 years, who'd laughed as they planned my humiliation, who'd never once questioned whether they had the right to treat me as less than human. Lydia's gaze swept the courtroom and landed on me. For just a second, something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe fear, possibly anger. Then she looked away, leaning close to whisper something to Whitmore. Judge Morrison reviewed the charges with methodical precision. Derek Jonathan Hayes, you are charged with administering harmful substances with intent to impair, a Class C felony, conspiracy to commit assault, a Class D felony, and attempted identity fraud, a Class D felony. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. Derek's voice was steady, almost bored, as though this were a minor inconvenience rather than a potentially life-altering legal proceeding. The judge turned to Lydia. Lydia Marie Hayes, you face identical charges. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. Her voice trembled slightly, a calculated vulnerability that I'd seen her use countless times to elicit sympathy. Whitmore stepped forward. Your Honor, my clients are respected members of this community with no prior criminal records. They have strong ties to the area, stable employment, and have already posted bail. We respectfully request that the existing bail conditions remain in place without modification. Judge Morrison looked down at the documents before him. The court notes that the charges involve premeditated administration of controlled substances to a family member, with intent to cause further harm. The audio recording provided by the prosecution suggests significant planning and lack of remorse. However, given the defendant's lack of criminal history and community ties, bail will remain at $50,000 each. He looked directly at Derek and Lydia. The no-contact order stands. You are not to contact, directly or indirectly, the victim in this case. You are not to leave the state. You will surrender your passports to the court clerk before leaving today. Violation of any of these conditions will result in immediate revocation of bail and arrest. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Preliminary hearing is set for, the judge consulted his calendar, October 18th at 9 a.m. Both defendants are required to attend. That was it. 5 minutes of legal formality, and they were walking back through the side door, free to return to their lives while I lived in a hotel under an assumed name, afraid of random encounters and vindictive retaliation. Case number 2024, CR 8848, State v. Patricia and Hayes and Gordon Frederick Hayes. My parents stood as the charges were read, obstruction of justice, conspiracy after the fact. Their lawyer, a woman I didn't recognize, entered not guilty pleas on their behalf. Their bail was set at $25,000 each, with similar no-contact conditions. Throughout the proceeding, my mother never looked in my direction. My father glanced once, his expression unreadable, then turned away. The message was clear: I had chosen my path, and they had chosen theirs, and those paths would never converge again. The arraignments concluded, and the courtroom began to empty. Lucas kept us seated until most of the crowd had filtered out, reducing the chance of an uncomfortable encounter in the hallway. That went as expected, he said. No surprises, no drama. Now we wait for the preliminary hearing. 3 weeks, I said. What happens in 3 weeks? The prosecution presents their evidence, and the judge decides if there's enough to proceed to trial. Given what we have, the recording, the toxicology reports, my testimony, I'd say it's almost certain they'll be bound over for trial. ADA Walsh joined us as we stood to leave. One thing you should know, Whitmore filed a motion this morning requesting that cameras be allowed in the courtroom during trial. He wants this case as public as possible. Why would he want that? Nathan asked. Doesn't that hurt his clients? He's betting that public pressure will work in their favor, Walsh explained. That your family's reputation and resources will influence public opinion, that portraying them as young people who made a mistake will generate sympathy. He'll try to turn this into a referendum on prosecutorial overreach rather than what it actually is, a case of calculated cruelty. Can we oppose the camera request? I asked. We will. But judges in high-profile cases often allow cameras, especially when there's significant public interest. I'm preparing you for that possibility. The media crowd had thinned by the time we left the courthouse, but several reporters still lingered. They shouted questions as we passed, and I kept my eyes forward, refusing to engage. But one voice cut through the others, familiar and unexpected. Cassie, please, just talk to us. I turned involuntarily and saw Jennifer, my cousin, pushing through the small crowd. She wasn't holding a microphone or camera, she was just there, tears streaming down her face. Jennifer? I said, confused. I'm so sorry, she said, reaching us despite the reporters trying to block her path. I should have said something years ago. I should have stood up to them when we were kids, when I saw how they treated you. I was a coward, and I'm so sorry. The raw emotion in her voice, the genuine remorse, cracked something in my chest that I'd been holding rigid and protected. I stepped forward and hugged her, ignoring the cameras capturing the moment. It's not your fault, I said quietly. You were a kid too. We all were. I want to help, Jennifer said, pulling back to look at me directly. Whatever you need, testimony about their behavior over the years, character witness, anything. I'll do it. Lucas handed her a business card. Call my office this afternoon. We'll talk. As we finally made it to the car and pulled away from the courthouse, I watched Jennifer's figure recede in the side mirror. Another person choosing to stand with me instead of against me, building the foundation of something new from the rubble of what had been destroyed. That was unexpected, Nathan observed. Good unexpected, I said. For once, good unexpected. We returned to the hotel, where I'd begun to mark the passage of time in small routines, morning coffee from the machine in the lobby, afternoons responding to messages from supporters, evenings watching the news coverage of our case with a strange sense of detachment, as though they were discussing someone else's life. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Cassandra Hayes? A woman's voice, professional and warm. Yes, who's calling? My name is Dr. Rachel Winters. I'm a psychologist who specializes in family trauma and abuse. I've been following your case in the news, and I wanted to reach out to offer my services, pro bono if needed. What you're going through, both the original trauma and now the legal proceedings, it's a lot for anyone to handle alone. I was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. Therapy had always seemed like something other people needed, people whose problems were more serious or legitimate than mine. But Dr. Winters had named something I'd been avoiding. I was going through trauma, and I was trying to handle it alone despite Nathan and Lucas's support. I'd like that, I said finally. Thank you. We scheduled an appointment for later that week, and after hanging up, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about punishing Derek and Lydia or holding my parents accountable. It was about healing from decades of damage that had shaped how I saw myself, how I moved through the world, how I understood love and family and worth. That evening, as Nathan slept beside me in our temporary hotel home, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not for the court case or the media, but for myself. I wrote about being 7 years old and watching Derek and Lydia play together, never invited to join. About being 12 and having Lydia, accidentally, destroy my science fair project the night before judging. About being 16 and overhearing my parents tell relatives that they had 2 successful children and one who needed extra support. I wrote about Nathan, about the first time he'd looked at me like I was someone worth knowing, not despite my background but including it. About Lucas refusing to look away when he saw something wrong. About Jennifer's tears in front of the courthouse, the weight of regret and the courage of finally speaking up. The words flowed like water through a broken dam, years of silence breaking apart into sentences and paragraphs and pages. By the time I finally closed the laptop, dawn was beginning to lighten the sky, and I'd written nearly 20 pages of memories and reflections and slowly emerging understanding. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to excavate who I might become once I was free from the weight of seeking approval from people who would never grant it. And that scared me almost as much as it exhilarated me, because I'd spent so long defining myself by my family's rejection that I wasn't sure who I was without it. But I had 3 weeks before the preliminary hearing, 3 weeks to start figuring that out. 3 weeks to build strength not through armor and defense, but through the vulnerable work of actually healing. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Whitmore leaked photos of Derek and Lydia doing community service. He's already trying to rehabilitate their image. We need to talk strategy. The legal battle was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. But as I looked at Nathan sleeping peacefully beside me, at the pages of writing on my laptop screen, at the morning light slowly filling our temporary refuge, I realized something important. Whatever happened in court, whatever Whitmore threw at us, whatever my family said or did, I'd already won the most important victory. I'd chosen myself. And that was something no judge or jury could take away. The week following the arraignment passed in a blur of legal consultations and strategic planning. Lucas and Ada Walsh worked tirelessly to build an airtight case, while Whitmore's media campaign painted my siblings as misguided young people who'd made a terrible mistake they deeply regretted. "Have you seen this?" Nathan asked, showing me his phone one morning. It was an interview with Derek and Lydia on a local morning show, both dressed conservatively, speaking in measured, remorseful tones. "We never intended for things to go this far," Lydia was saying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We were trying to help Cassie relax before her wedding. We had no idea the medication would affect her so severely. We feel terrible about what happened." The interviewer, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes, leaned forward. "And the recording where you discussed shaving her head and posting photos online?" Derek took over smoothly. "That was frustrated venting after a very emotional evening. We were upset that Cassie had been taken to the hospital instead of staying with family. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're stressed and worried." "They're lying," I said flatly, though my hands trembled as I set down the phone. "They're rewriting everything." "The jury will hear the actual recording," Nathan reminded me. "They'll hear the laughter, the planning, the complete lack of concern for your well-being. Whitmore can spin all he wants, but the evidence speaks for itself." My first therapy session with Dr. Winters happened 3 days after the arraignment. Her office was in a converted house near the university, warm and comfortable with plants on every surface and soft lighting that made everything feel safe. "Tell me about your family," she said after we'd settled into our respective chairs. "Not the family that drugged you, just your family. Where did you fit in that system?" The question opened something I hadn't known was locked. For 90 minutes, I talked about being the oldest child who somehow always felt youngest in terms of importance. About watching my parents light up around Derek and Lydia in ways they never did with me. About learning early that my needs came last, my achievements were minimized, my pain was an inconvenience. "You became invisible," Dr. Winters observed. "Not because you weren't there, but because making yourself small was the only way to avoid their active hostility." The accuracy of her assessment hit like a physical blow. I had made myself small, had spent decades apologizing for taking up space, had internalized their message that I was somehow fundamentally less worthy of love and consideration. "The work ahead of you," Dr. Winters continued gently, "isn't just about the trial or holding them accountable legally. It's about unlearning 30 years of conditioning that taught you your value was determined by their approval." I left that session feeling raw but oddly hopeful, as though someone had finally named something I'd been trying to articulate my entire life. The preliminary hearing loomed closer, and Lucas prepared me for what to expect. Unlike the brief arraignment, this would involve actual testimony and evidence presentation. I would likely be called to the stand. Whitmore will cross-examine you, Lucas warned during one of our preparation sessions. He's going to try to rattle you, to make you seem unreliable or vindictive. We need to practice. So we practiced. Lucas playing Whitmore, asking increasingly hostile questions designed to undermine my credibility. Isn't it true, Ms. Hayes, that you've always been jealous of your siblings' success? Isn't it true that you've had a troubled relationship with your family for years? Isn't it convenient that this recording only surfaced after you decided to press charges? Each question felt like a small knife, but I learned to answer calmly, factually, without getting defensive or emotional. The work was exhausting but necessary. Meanwhile, more people were coming forward. Former classmates of Derek and Lydia reached out to Lucas with stories of bullying and cruelty dating back to elementary school. Teachers who'd witnessed their behavior but felt powerless to address it given my parents' influence in the community. Even some of my parents' former friends, disgusted by the cover-up attempt, quietly offered their support. We're building a pattern, Lucas explained. Showing that this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a lifelong dynamic of abuse and enablement. Jennifer became a regular presence in my life, calling every few days to check in, sharing her own memories of family gatherings where Derek and Lydia's cruelty had been normalized and dismissed. She'd agreed to testify as a character witness, despite knowing it would likely sever her relationship with her aunt and uncle permanently. They made their choice, she said firmly when I expressed concern about the cost to her. Now I'm making mine. I should have made it years ago. The night before the preliminary hearing, I couldn't sleep. Nathan and I had moved to a furnished apartment Lucas had helped us find, no longer able to sustain the hotel expense. The space was small but felt more like home than the anonymous hotel room had. I sat on the balcony watching the city lights, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Tomorrow I would face my siblings in court, would have to speak about what they'd done while they sat mere feet away. The thought made my stomach churn with anxiety. Nathan joined me, draping a blanket over my shoulders against the October chill. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said quietly, you've already shown more courage than most people ever have to. You chose truth over comfort, justice over family approval. That matters. What if I can't do it? I asked. What if I get up there and fall apart, or Whitmore tears me to shreds, or the judge decides there isn't enough evidence? Then we appeal, we keep fighting, we find another path. But Cassie, you need to understand something. You're not that scared little girl anymore, trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. You're a woman who's building a life based on her own values, who's standing up not just for herself but for every other person who's been told their abuse doesn't matter because it came from family. His words settled something in me that had been loose and frantic. He was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. Other people were watching, were finding courage in my decision to stop accepting the unacceptable. The preliminary hearing began promptly at 9 o'clock. Judge Morrison presided again, his expression giving nothing away as Ada Walsh called her first witness, Lucas. Lucas described what he'd observed at the party in precise detail. Lydia approaching with the champagne glasses, the suspicious movement he'd witnessed, my rapid deterioration, his decision to document everything and follow us to the hospital. Whitmore's cross-examination was aggressive but careful. Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you were drinking alcohol yourself that evening? I had one beer earlier in the evening, yes. So your judgment may have been impaired? No. One beer over the course of 3 hours did not impair my judgment or my ability to observe what happened. But you admit you can't say with absolute certainty what my client put in that glass? I saw her drop something into the champagne. The subsequent toxicology report confirmed what that substance was. Whitmore moved on, unable to shake Lucas's testimony. Next came the emergency room physician who treated me, describing my condition upon arrival and the dangerous levels of drugs in my system. In your medical opinion, doctor, was the drug combination potentially life-threatening? Absolutely. The dosage of Rohypnol combined with the sedative could have caused respiratory depression or cardiac arrest. Miss Hayes was fortunate she received medical attention when she did. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they might give out, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Walsh's questions were straightforward, designed to establish the basic facts of what happened. I described the party, drinking the champagne, the rapid onset of symptoms, waking up in the hospital. My voice remained steady, factual, though my hands gripped the edge of the witness box so tightly my knuckles were white. Then Whitmore stood for cross-examination, and everything changed. Miss Hayes, you've testified that your relationship with your siblings has been troubled for many years. Is that correct? Yes. Would you say you've harbored resentment toward them? I've been hurt by their treatment of me, yes. Hurt enough to want revenge? Walsh objected immediately. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Whitmore. Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that you were jealous of your siblings' success and social standing? I took a breath, remembering Lucas's coaching. I was hurt by the different treatment we received from our parents, but I wasn't jealous of Derek and Lydia themselves. Yet you chose to press criminal charges that could send them to prison for years, potentially destroying their careers and reputations. That seems like a rather extreme response to what my clients maintain was a misguided attempt to help you relax. They didn't try to help me relax. They drugged me with substances that could have killed me, with the specific intention of humiliating me at my own wedding. The audio recording confirms their intent. Ah yes, this recording. Whitmore picked up a document from his table. A recording that was made without anyone's knowledge or consent, capturing private conversations at a family gathering. Convenient, wouldn't you say? My phone was recording accidentally. I had no idea until Lucas told me after I woke up in the hospital. Or so you claim. Isn't it possible you deliberately recorded the evening, hoping to catch your siblings saying something you could use against them? No. I didn't even know the recording existed until the next day. Whitmore paced, building towards something. Miss Hayes, have you ever been diagnosed with any mental health conditions? Walsh shot to her feet. Objection. Relevance? Your Honor, the witness's mental state is directly relevant to assessing the reliability of her testimony and her motivations for pursuing these charges. Judge Morrison considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Whitmore. Ms. Hayes? Whitmore prompted. I've experienced depression and anxiety, I admitted, feeling exposed. Related to years of family dysfunction and emotional abuse. Depression and anxiety that could potentially cause you to misinterpret events or overreact to normal family tensions? No. What happened wasn't a misinterpretation. I was drugged. The medical evidence confirms that. But your perception of your siblings' intent, your belief that they meant you harm rather than help, could that be colored by your mental health struggles and your admittedly troubled relationship with them? The question was insidious, designed to make my legitimate trauma response seem like mental instability. I could feel the trap closing, the implication that my depression made me unreliable, that years of abuse had somehow disqualified me from accurately describing my own experience. Mr. Whitmore, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, having depression doesn't make me unable to recognize when I've been deliberately harmed. If anything, it makes me more aware of the patterns of abuse I've experienced. My siblings drugged me. They planned to humiliate me publicly. They laughed about it on recording. No amount of questioning my mental health changes those facts. For just a moment, Whitmore's confident expression flickered. He'd expected me to crumble under the mental health questioning, to become defensive or emotional in ways that would undermine my credibility. Instead, I'd acknowledged my struggles while refusing to let them be weaponized against me. No further questions, he said abruptly, returning to his seat. Walsh called two more witnesses, Detective Brennan, who testified about the investigation and the authenticity of the recording, and a forensic audio analyst who confirmed the recording had not been edited or manipulated. Then Walsh played the recording itself. In the quiet courtroom, Derek and Lydia's voices rang out with devastating clarity. Their laughter as they discussed the drugging. Their detailed planning of the head shaving and photo distribution. their casual certainty that they would face no real consequences. I watched the judge's face as he listened, saw his expression harden. Across the courtroom, I could see Derek and Lydia sitting rigidly, Lydia's earlier tears conspicuously absent now. When the recording finished, the silence was profound. Judge Morrison removed his glasses and set them on the bench. "I've heard enough. The court finds probable cause to believe that felonies had been committed and that the defendants committed them. Derek Hayes and Lydia Hayes are hereby bound over for trial on all charges. Trial date will be set within 60 days. He looked directly at my siblings. "I'm also modifying bail conditions. Given the premeditated nature of these alleged crimes and the evidence of planning, both defendants will be fitted with GPS monitoring devices and will observe a curfew of 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. Any violation will result in immediate revocation of bail." Whitmore stood quickly. "Your Honor, that's unnecessarily restrictive. The defendants allegedly planned and executed a sophisticated scheme to drug and humiliate the victim," Morrison interrupted. "I consider these restrictions appropriate given the severity and calculated nature of the alleged offenses." Court is adjourned. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I sat frozen in the witness box, unable to quite process what had just happened. We'd cleared the preliminary hearing. The case was going to trial. My siblings would face a jury of their peers and have to answer for what they'd done. Lucas appeared beside me, offering his hand to help me down. "You did beautifully up there. Whitmore tried to shake you, and you held firm." "I feel like I'm going to throw up," I admitted. "That's adrenaline. It'll pass." "But Cassie, you need to understand what just happened. The judge imposed GPS monitoring and curfew without the prosecution even requesting it. That means he thinks they're dangerous. That helps our case significantly." Outside the courtroom, Jennifer was waiting with several other cousins I'd barely spoken to in years. They surrounded me with hugs and words of support, creating a buffer between me and the reporters shouting questions from behind the security line. "We're proud of you," Jennifer said. "What you did in there, standing up to Whitmore's questions, that took real strength." As we made our way to the parking garage, Nathan's arm steady around my waist, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph exactly, but a quiet recognition that I'd survived another test, had spoken my truth despite every attempt to discredit it, and had been believed. The legal battle was far from over. A trial would bring new challenges, new attempts to tear me down and rebuild the narrative in my siblings' favor. But today, in that courtroom, the truth had been heard and validated. And sometimes, that's the first step toward justice, not the end of the journey, but the moment when you realize you're no longer walking it alone. The trial date was set for December 3rd, giving us 6 weeks to prepare. Those weeks became a strange rhythm of legal preparation punctuated by moments of ordinary life: grocery shopping, cooking dinner, walks in the park where Nathan and I tried to remember what it felt like to exist outside the shadow of the case. Dr. Winters and I met twice a week, excavating layers of conditioning and trauma I hadn't fully recognized. She helped me understand that my impulse to minimize what had happened, to find ways to excuse my family's behavior, was itself a survival mechanism I'd developed over decades. "You learned early that acknowledging the full extent of their cruelty was too painful," she explained during one session. "So you found ways to make it smaller, more manageable. You told yourself they didn't mean it, that you were overreacting, that it was just sibling rivalry. But Cassandra, what they did to you wasn't normal sibling conflict. It was systematic devaluation." The words gave language to something I'd always felt but never been able to articulate. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. I was responding rationally to irrational treatment that had been normalized by the very people inflicting it. Lucas worked relentlessly on trial preparation, interviewing witnesses, and building our narrative. Whitmore, meanwhile, continued his media campaign, giving interviews that portrayed Derek and Lydia as victims of a vindictive prosecution and an unstable sister. "Let him talk," Walsh advised during one of our strategy sessions. "Every interview he gives, every sympathetic profile of your siblings, it all creates expectations. And when the jury hears that recording, when they see the evidence, the contrast between his spin and reality will be devastating." 3 weeks before trial, something unexpected happened. My mother called. Not my phone, she couldn't violate the no-contact order, but she called Nathan's number, knowing I'd be nearby. "Don't answer it," I said when his phone rang and we saw her name. But Nathan looked at me with a question in his eyes. "What if she's calling to apologize?" he asked gently. "What if she's finally ready to acknowledge what happened?" I wanted to believe that was possible. Despite everything, some small part of me still hoped my mother might choose me over the twins, might finally see the truth and act accordingly. "Put it on speaker," I said. Nathan answered. "Mrs. Hayes." "Nathan, is Cassandra there? I need to speak with her. It's important." My mother's voice was tense, controlled. "I'm here, Mom," I said. "What do you want?" A pause. "Then, I want you to understand what you're doing to this family. Your father has had to resign from the board of his company due to the criminal charges. Rebecca's wedding venue has cancelled, citing reputational concerns. Your siblings may lose their jobs. All because you refuse to handle this privately like a mature adult." The words hit like physical blows, each one calculated to wound. Not concern for my well-being, not acknowledgement of what had been done to me, just blame for the consequences of their own actions. "Mom, they drugged me. They planned to humiliate me at my wedding. The recording proves." "The recording proves nothing except that you secretly recorded a private family gathering, probably deliberately, so you could twist their words against them. You've always been manipulative, Cassandra. We just never wanted to admit it." Something inside me that had been cracking finally broke clean through. Not into pieces, but into clarity. "You know what, Mom? You're right. I am doing this to the family. I'm holding people accountable for their actions. I'm refusing to pretend that attempted poisoning is just a prank gone wrong. And if that destroys the Hayes family reputation, maybe that reputation was built on a foundation that deserved to crumble." "You ungrateful." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I'm not ungrateful. I'm done. Done trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. Done accepting blame for other people's cruelty. Done making myself small so Derek and Lydia could feel big. I'm just done, Mom. And nothing you say is going to change that." I nodded at Nathan, who ended the call. My mother's voice cut off mid-sentence, and silence filled our apartment. "How do you feel?" Nathan asked carefully. "Free," I said, surprised by the truth of it. "I feel free." The call had been recorded. Lucas had set up all our phones to automatically record any contact attempts by my family. Walsh added it to the evidence file as another violation of the no-contact order, though my mother claimed she'd called Nathan's phone, not mine, so technically she hadn't violated anything. "It shows consciousness of guilt," Walsh explained. "She knows she's not supposed to contact you, so she's trying to work around it while still attempting to intimidate you into dropping charges. The jury will see right through it." As December approached, media coverage intensified. The trial was shaping up to be the biggest local story in years. Wealth, family dysfunction, attempted poisoning, all wrapped in the compelling narrative of a wedding eve gone horribly wrong. Nathan and I made a decision. We would get married before the trial started. "I don't want our wedding to be something that happened in the shadow of this case," I explained to Lucas when we told him our plan. "I want to marry Nathan because I love him and want to build a life with him, not as a footnote to my siblings' criminal trial." We gathered 15 people in a small chapel 3 days before the trial began. Nathan's parents, who'd flown in from Oregon. Lucas and his partner. Jennifer and a few other cousins who'd supported me throughout this ordeal. Dr. Winters, who'd become more than just my therapist. And a handful of close friends who'd stood by us through everything. No elaborate planning, no expensive venue, no anxiety about seating charts or family politics. Just 2 people promising to love each other, witnessed by people who actually cared about our well-being. I wore a simple white dress I'd found on sale. Nathan wore a suit he already owned. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. And it was perfect. "I promise to choose you," Nathan said during his vows, his voice thick with emotion. Every day, in every way, no matter what. Not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly yourself. And that's more than enough. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Whatever happened in the trial, whatever my family tried to do, I had this. I had someone who saw me completely and loved me anyway, who chose me not despite my struggles but including them. The trial began on a cold Monday morning. The courtroom was packed, reporters, curious onlookers, family members from both sides creating a visible divide down the center aisle. Jury selection took 2 full days. Whitmore used his challenges to eliminate anyone who seemed too sympathetic to victims of family violence. Walsh struck anyone with obvious bias toward wealthy defendants or who expressed skepticism about believing women's testimony. The jury they finally seated was diverse in age and background, 6 women, 6 men, ranging from a retired teacher to a construction worker to a small business owner. People who, Walsh hoped, would understand that wealth and status didn't exempt anyone from accountability. Opening statements began on Wednesday. Walsh was precise and devastating, walking the jury through the timeline, the evidence, the undeniable proof of premeditation and malice. This isn't a story about a prank gone wrong, she concluded. This is a story about 2 people who drugged their sister with substances that could have killed her, who planned to humiliate her at the most important moment of her life, and who laughed about it afterward. The evidence will show that Derek and Lydia Hayes are guilty of every charge against them. Whitmore's opening was equally compelling, painting my siblings as young people who made a terrible mistake in judgment, who were trying to help a stressed sister relax, who never intended Rayal harm. The prosecution wants you to believe this was some calculated scheme, he said, his voice measured and reasonable. But what you'll hear is the story of a family torn apart by misunderstanding and miscommunication. Yes, my clients made poor choices that night. Yes, they said things in frustration they shouldn't have said. But criminal malice? Intent to cause serious harm? The evidence simply doesn't support that interpretation. The prosecution's case unfolded over 5 days. Lucas testified again, even more effectively than at the preliminary hearing. The ER physician described my condition in clinical detail that made several jurors visibly uncomfortable. Detective Brennan walked through the investigation with methodical precision. And then the recording played. For 45 minutes, the jury heard my siblings' voices discussing their plan, laughing about my expected humiliation, expressing zero concern for my well-being. Several jurors took notes. One woman in the back row wiped her eyes. I testified on the 4th day. Walsh's questions were straightforward, allowing me to tell my story without interruption. I described 30 years of systematic mistreatment, the wedding eve party, waking up in the hospital, learning what had been planned for me. Then Whitmore stood for cross-examination, and I braced myself. But something had changed since the preliminary hearing. Maybe it was getting married, or the weeks of therapy, or simply reaching a breaking point where I had nothing left to lose. Whatever the reason, his questions didn't land the way they had before. Miss Hayes, excuse me, Mrs. Cross now, isn't it? Yes. Convenient timing for a wedding, just before this trial. Walsh objected. Relevance? Sustained. Move on, Mr. Whitmore. He shifted tactics. Mrs. Cross, you've testified about years of alleged mistreatment by your siblings. Yet you continued to attend family events, maintained contact, even participated in wedding planning with your sister. Why would you do that if the abuse was as severe as you claim? Because I kept hoping things would change, I said simply. Because they were my family, and I'd been taught that family was supposed to matter more than anything else. Because I didn't have language yet for what was happening to me, or understand that I had the right to refuse it. But you have that language now. Thanks to, he consulted his notes, Dr. Rachel Winters, the therapist who's been treating you. Isn't it possible that Dr. Winters has influenced your perception of past events, helped you reinterpret normal family conflicts as abuse? Dr. Winters helped me understand what I already knew but couldn't articulate. She didn't create false memories or manufacture abuse. She gave me tools to recognize patterns I'd been living with my entire life. Whitmore pressed harder, trying to undermine my credibility, but I'd been prepared for every angle. When he finally sat down, I felt drained but steady. I'd told my truth, and I'd done it without falling apart. The defense case was predictably sympathetic. Derek and Lydia both testified, tearful and remorseful, claiming they'd only meant to help me relax, that they'd had no idea the drugs would be dangerous, that the recording captured them venting frustration rather than describing actual intent. "I love my sister," Lydia said, dabbing at her eyes. "I would never deliberately hurt her. This whole situation has been a nightmare for our entire family." But on cross-examination, Walsh was surgical. "Ms. Hayes, you testified that you only meant to help your sister relax. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Then why did you follow her to the hospital with scissors and a razor, intending to shave her head while she was unconscious?" Lydia faltered. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was upset. Upset enough to bring tools to physically alter your unconscious sister's appearance? That doesn't sound like concern to me, Ms. Hayes. That sounds like exactly what you described on the recording, a plan to humiliate her." Walsh played a specific segment of the recording, Lydia's voice bright with excitement. "The photos will be everywhere. Cassie passed out, didn't even stir when I shaved her head. Ms. Hayes, that recording was made before you went to the hospital, before you attempted to shave your sister's head. You're describing something that hadn't happened yet. How can you claim this was frustrated venting when you were clearly describing your plan?" Lydia had no good answer. Neither did Derek when Walsh took him through similar contradictions between his testimony and his recorded words. Closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. Walsh was powerful and concise, tying together every piece of evidence into an undeniable narrative of calculated cruelty. Whitmore made his final appeal to sympathy, to the jury's potential reluctance to send young people from good families to prison over one terrible mistake. The jury deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days. Nathan and I waited in a private room Lucas had arranged, trying to distract ourselves with card games and small talk while my stomach churned with anxiety. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. Derek and Lydia sat at the defense table, both pale, Lydia gripping her lawyer's arm. My parents sat behind them, my mother's face frozen in rigid composure. Judge Morrison addressed the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of administering harmful substances with intent to impair, how do you find the defendant Derek Hayes?" "Guilty." The words seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. Lydia's sharp intake of breath was audible from where I sat. "On the same charge, how do you find the defendant Lydia Hayes?" "Guilty." Charge by charge, the verdicts came down. Guilty. 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 On every count. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. My father sat stone-faced, staring straight ahead. Judge Morrison thanked the jury and dismissed them, then turned to the defense table. "Sentencing will occur in 30 days. Until then, the defendants will remain on bail under existing conditions. Court is adjourned." As the gavel fell, I felt Nathan's arm around me, Lucas's hand on my shoulder, the weight of Jennifer's tearful hug. But I was watching my siblings as bailiffs approached to re-verify their GPS monitors, their faces showing shock and disbelief that they'd actually been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, Walsh addressed the gathered media while Lucas shielded us from direct questions. "Justice was served today," Walsh said simply. 2 individuals who committed serious crimes have been held accountable for their actions. This case sends a clear message that family relationships don't excuse criminal behavior, that wealth and status don't place anyone above the law. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later, just before Christmas. Judge Morrison was direct and uncompromising. The evidence in this case demonstrated calculated cruelty and complete disregard for the victim's well-being and safety. The court finds no mitigating factors sufficient to justify leniency. Derek received 5 years in state prison. Lydia received 4.5 years. Both would be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of their sentences, but only with demonstrated rehabilitation and genuine remorse, something the judge made clear he found notably absent from their trial testimony. My parents, whose trial for obstruction had been delayed pending the main case, eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges. They received 2 years probation and substantial fines, avoiding prison time but forever marked by criminal records. Nathan and I spent Christmas in our apartment, just the two of us, cooking dinner together and watching old movies. It was quiet and simple and exactly what I needed. On New Year's Eve, we hosted a small gathering, Lucas and his partner, Jennifer and her husband, Dr. Winters and her wife, a handful of friends who'd supported us through everything. To new beginnings, Lucas toasted as midnight approached. And to Cassandra, who showed us all what courage really looks like. As everyone raised their glasses, I felt Nathan's hand find mine, felt the warmth of people who'd chosen to stand with me, and realized something profound. I'd spent 30 years searching for family in people who would never give it. But family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about showing up, about believing someone when they told you they'd been hurt, about choosing compassion over convenience. "Thank you," I said softly, looking around at the faces of people who'd become my real family. "For seeing me. For believing me. For being here." As the countdown began and the new year arrived, I kissed my husband, surrounded by people who loved me, and felt something I'd never quite experienced before, belonging. Not the desperate, conditional belonging I'd sought from my birth family, but the solid, unconditional belonging that came from being valued for exactly who I was. Derek and Lydia would spend the next several years in prison, learning that actions have consequences even when you've spent your life avoiding them. My parents would rebuild their lives from the ruins of their reputation, finally forced to confront what their enabling had cost. And me? I would continue therapy, would keep building a life based on my own values rather than others' expectations, would learn day by day what it meant to take up space without apologizing for it. The wedding that never happened, the family I'd lost, the public humiliation of having my private pain displayed for strangers, none of it would disappear. But it no longer defined me. I was more than what had been done to me. I was someone who'd chosen dignity over denial, truth over comfortable lies, healing over bitterness. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.